All right, today I'm going to be replacing the CV boot on a Kodiak 450. And this has just got a CV boot that needs replaced on this left-hand side here on the inner joint. On the inner joint on the right-hand side, it's gonna need an entire ball joint assembly, and I'll be showing you how to do that as well. But a little more difficult of a process, not hard by any means, but certainly more difficult than replacing just the entire axle is replacing the boot. They're just a little more involved, kind of a greasy job, a dirty job. It's just a little time consuming, but I'll walk you through every step of the way. First thing you're gonna wanna do is pull this wheel off. We've got four 17mm lug nuts. We'll get those four pulled off of there. Pull the wheel off of them. We'll set that aside. We have no use for that for now. Now we're gonna pull this caliper off here. This caliper is a 12mm bolts on the back side here. I like to use a swivel with my 12mm socket. That allows me to turn it like this and impact it off of there. Just kind of a hard spot to get to with your impact. You can use a wrench on here as well. That just takes a little bit longer, is why we use an impact. When you take and pull that caliper off, then check those pads. If you're gonna go ahead and replace those pads, pretty easy to do that at this point. We've got your Allen screws here. In this position, if your pads aren't completely destroyed, what I do is just pull these two pins here, grab a screwdriver, go in between these pads, kind of pry it open slightly. You don't need much space in between there, enough to slide this disc over top. And then these pads will just lift straight out of there. This one will kind of have to go over and up. And then you can put your new pads in there. Make sure there's like a spring plate underneath of these pads that keeps pressure on them. So just make sure you push down. While you're pushing down, just push these pins back in there. Tighten those down, slide it over your disc, and you're all set. So pretty easy to do that at this point. Next, we're gonna pull our knuckle off of here. So we've got a larger nut here. All right, we've got 1 1/16 nut on here. I use a 1/2 inch drive. These are a little bit tighter to get off. The reason why they are tight is because right on the side here, I'm not sure if you can see it from your angle, where the axle runs through this nut, they ding up that nut. That way it keeps that nut from spinning off. All right, that nut is off there. Fairly easy to do. And we'll take and pull that hub off of there. Next, we're gonna pull this knuckle off. So there's a top and a bottom bolt here. These are gonna be a 17mm. And then I take a 14 wrench. And pull this knuckle off of here. A lot of dirt and debris on this four-wheeler. All right, then you can just take and pull that knuckle off. If we were gonna replace bearings, we could do that at this point. These are the wheel bearings. We've got a circlip right here. Pull that circlip out of there. There's just one bearing, even though it looks like two. And you can just take and tap it out this way. So tap it out towards the outside of your four-wheeler there. Take your new ones, which I would have put in the freezer before installing them. Slide them right in, use a bearing driver, push them in far enough to be able to get that circlip on there. Fairly easy project there. Now we're getting ready to pull our axle. What I'm gonna have you do is grab some grease rags, because what happens, I clean this area up completely. When you take and pull this shaft out of here, you are gonna have some oil dump out of that differential. All right, we'll get ready to pull this axle out. Make sure you have the rags handy. Make sure you wiped up all that entire area there. Okay, we've got this drive shaft pulled out of the machine there. I've showed you how to do that. Now what we're gonna do is pull this joint apart here, replace this boot. First thing I like to do is grab a small screwdriver and a small hammer, and these look like the clamps that come on it from the factory. If you've had other clamps on there since then, or replace the boots at some point your clamps may look a little different. This one here, we're gonna actually just spread out this clamp. I might have to reuse these. These clamps don't really wear out. The point right here that I'm prying on is really the part that at some point, you know, you do this enough times to this band, and these little tabs may break, but they don't wear out. Okay, once you get those tabs pushed over far enough, that center of that band's just gonna come right out of there just like that. And I like to take and pry this, get this clamp just completely out of there, set that aside. We possibly can reuse this, we'll see. If our boot kit comes with another band, we'll just put a new one on there. But sometimes some of the sets that aren't as expensive, or maybe I've robbed the bands out of them, don't have bands, we'll reuse these. Same thing with the small one then, pry those little tabs up, get that loosened, and that one you just kind of slide off. Now if you know you have new bands, you've already ordered those. EPI comes with new bands, Moose comes with new bands, All Balls comes with them, and countless other ones. You can actually just take and cut those bands off. The other thing you can do, if this boot is completely bad and destroyed, or even if you're just ripped it all, you can take and cut that boot off of there. Sometimes that's a little messy doing it that way. So if I can slip it all off together like we're doing here, that's what I'll do. Next thing you do, pull that boot back far enough, that or if it's cut off, make sure you cut it off, and get the joint to this point here. And then I grab a pick. I like to use a pick with a 90-degree elbow on there. And you'll find grooves, and I'm gonna grab a rag, clean this up. You're not gonna be able to see it because of the position you are here, but there's little grooves in there. I'll show you those here in a second. And then you take and pop a clip out of there. Just a wire clip, almost a full circle, but not. That's what it looks like there, covered in grease. And that clip will snap right out of there. Now, again, I'll show you that joint here in a second, and I'll show you what that looks like so you know. Now what you can do then is take that joint completely off of there. There's the joint there. Inspect that, make sure there's no major wear areas. This boot just had a small rip in it and still has a lot of grease in there, so we know that this joint isn't gonna be bad. Okay, now what we do is grab snap ring pliers. They don't have to be very big, and they can be straight or 90 like these here. And I take this axle here, lift it up, and I'm gonna clean a little bit of this out of here so I can see what we're doing with here. This is a very dirty job. Suggest getting some gloves like we have here. Otherwise, you're going to be cleaning grease out of your fingernails, underneath your fingernails for a long time. So there we go. Got that cleaned up to the point where we can see where that snap ring is. We take and slide that off just like that. Keep in mind how this joint is situated on here. They're always going to be this way. So if you need to refer back to my video, but it's the cup side is this way, and I'll show you what I mean here in a second. But there's a groove here, and you're able to slip that on and get that snap ring on. Going back together, I'll show you why we need to remember that. So pull that off of there, and there's your joint there. You can see it a little bit there. I'll show you once it's cleaned up. Now we're able just to take this boot, pull this off. What that does is grab a lot of that grease that's right there. We'll take and set that down. We're gonna clean up our work area here, grab the boot that we're gonna use, and go back together with it. Okay, we've got our boot here. We're ready to go back together. I've got this joint cleaned up. I've got the axle here cleaned up. I've got the joint itself cleaned up here, as well as the two clips. So I'm gonna take this off. The kit that we have does have the band, so we're not gonna reuse this one. And we're gonna get ready to go back together. So now the first thing you're gonna do, if you've got a band that's closed like this, you're gonna wanna slip that on at this point. The bands that we have are are going to be open, so you're going to be able to wrap them up after the actual joint is on there. So the first thing we're going to want to do is take this boot, slide it on there, and slide it far enough to where it's going to be completely out of the way. Next thing you're going to do is grab this joint here, and remember I said I'd show you what it looks like without the grease on it. So on this side here, you can see it's flat. We've got this inner part of the joint here that's flush with the outer part. Right here, the outer part is actually protruding. It's sticking out farther than this inner joint. So you want to slide that on this way. So it'll look just like this. And a lot of times what you need to do is take your hands, wrap them around the balls there and slide that on. That way those balls don't go everywhere. If you've got a little bit of grease in there still, they might kind of hold itself on there. So once we get that part in, now what we're going to do is grab the clip here. Then I'm going to grab our snap ring pliers, and I'm going to take and hold this up, slide this on there. I'm going to make sure that that clip sits down into place. A lot of times you can see it snap together there. So that went on pretty slick. Next thing we're going to do is grab some grease here. This grease will come with your boot kit. Make sure you use a lot of it. I'm going to take now and I'm going to start dumping it into this joint here. Once you get about a third of the way up, find this clip here, set it right beside you. Take this joint here, slide it into, and it's got, I thought I'd show you this why I have it off here. There's indentions all the way around here where these balls are going to sit. They're going to swivel inside of there. So it's going to work as a ball joint, just like it is. What you want to make sure of is run your fingers up and down these grooves here to make sure there's no pitting or grooving at all besides what's supposed to be there. Because if there's any kind of movement sideways like that, you will have some clicking in your joint when you get it back together and start to speed up on the four-wheeler. So just make sure it's cleaned up and in good condition. Once you get that on, what I do is I'll take that joint, slide it together, and I'll actually slide it clear into that grease. And you can maybe see there, you'll start to have grease squirt out through that bearing, through that joint there. What I stop then before that grease gets completely pushed up through there, because I like to see where I'm putting my ring here, make sure it's in that groove, and make sure that this ring is completely seated before I continue on. Once that snaps into place, what you can do, you can keep pushing, and you'll keep pushing that grease out of there. What I do then is I'll finish filling this cup up with oil or with grease. They give you quite a bit of grease for this job because they want this to be lubricated really, really well. Okay, now I like to take and wipe off any excess grease that may have dripped outside of this cup, because once we slide this boot on there, you want that to seat really, really well. So we'll take and push that boot on there. Make sure it's completely seated. There's a groove right here for your band and a groove over here for your band. So you want to make sure that you situate those bands in the correct spot. We're going to actually try and use this one. No reason at all, except for I want to see if it's possible. And this boot is actually a little bit thicker than the stock one, so we may not be able to, but I'm going to slide that into place there. This is a stock clamp here, so I'm showing you how to put this back on. Typically you would take and put another one, like I'll show you how to do the inside here, back together. So we're able just to push that together there like that. Got these slid together. I'll take our side dikes and clamp these two pins close together there. They'll close up that gap. Then I'll take a hammer and I'll finish seating them. On this one, you want to make sure you don't damage this ring here when you're doing that. That's why I flip that axle over to look. If you're just tapping on it a little bit like that, it's not going to damage it, but if you're really getting after it, it very well could damage that ring there. These can be straightened up and replaced if needed, but you don't want to put it back together damaged. Okay, we have got that one seated there. Now I'm going to show you how to do this inner here. Start. Okay, we've got our banding tool here, and I sell these. I'll post a link below to those. But what you do then, you grab a band like this, and these bands are extremely flimsy, but it doesn't really matter. All they have to do is tighten up and wrap it around your axle just like that. So open it up. I like to keep the loose end towards me, and that just makes it a little bit easier when using this tool. Make sure you're seated in the right position there, and take and tighten that up as tight as you can with your finger. Take this piece here. I like to get this all in my video. Take and slide that banding tool through there. Now you take and slide it through the actual cutter of it there. So now you'll see that that band is continuing through there. Now slide it through the actual tension part of it, which is the back little knob here. And I take and just pull it all the way through. Now be careful with this side that you don't let this piece get into the actual boot itself and rip it. Ours is loose enough here, and we can tighten it up with a little Allen, but I like to be able to just take it completely off like this. So get it as snug as you can there with your hands, and then take and start turning it. Now you don't want to turn it so much because these bands will break no matter what size or style they are. They will break if you put enough tension on there. So you just like to get it so it's starting to smash that boot there enough to seal it up. Just kind of use your head a little bit to know when that's going to seal it up. Now what I do is put a little crease in it. So I'll keep my finger here on the actual tightening part of it, and I'll take and let it turn up just like that, and then that creases it. Take and turn it back, and then now you can take the cutting portion of it and get that to the position that you want it and start cutting. Okay, once we get that band cut there, I'm going to take and I'm going to find any kind of loose ends, because what I don't want to happen is when you've got this boot crease like that there, I don't want that boot coming up and ripping. So if where we cut it, it's sharp, you want to make sure and bend that down. You want to take the tabs just like we did on the larger band there and fold those over. So kind of pinching the top of them here, fold those over. I'm going to grab my hammer, being really careful not to pinch the boot there. And I'm going to tap and kind of flatten all of that there. Also, you want to check this back side here. For whatever reason on these Quad Boss, the cheaper bands, the back side pulls up there, and you've got a potential spot for a rip there. So once you get that situated and all that cleaned up, I like to make sure it's wiped up really good. I like to take and I like to move it, just make sure it's got a good feel to it. And then we can go back together with it. All right, we're ready to go back together here. We got this axle and this joint put back together. Inspect it, make sure there's no debris on the inside there of where this joint is gonna go back into the differential, and then get it ready to go back together. What you wanna do here, make sure these grease rags are ready to come out, and then take this axle and slip it up in there. Being really careful to center this. I've had people say that they've ripped seals doing it this way. I've never ripped a seal doing it this way, but I am careful to make sure that I've got it centered and ready to go back together before I just grab a hammer and start slamming on it. Most of the time you can put some pressure on it and just use your hand to slide it in there. Sometimes that's not the case, but sometimes you can just work it in just like that. And it shouldn't be that difficult. If it's that difficult, maybe check those splines, make sure everything's lined up. All right, once we have that axle in there, we're gonna take our hub next and put that on. Make sure when you're doing this that you've got your keepers on the outside here, your washers. Make sure that those stay in place there. Make sure you put this on the right direction. Okay, I'm gonna move the caliper out of the way here so you can see what we're doing, but slip the axle through your bearings there. Make sure that that's in the right position there. Take and slide that down into place, and grab your bolts here. These bolts are going to be the same size, so it doesn't matter which one goes where. Because we pushed this top A-arm up, we're gonna have to push it back down to where it was before. Making sure that those washers stay where they need to be. Take and slide that in just like that. And I like to do this right away so you don't forget these, because once you get the caliper on, these are a little bit harder to get to. Grab our 17 millimeter and our 14 millimeter wrench. Tighten these up. Next, we're gonna grab our caliper, make sure it's positioned where we need it to be, and set that aside there. We're gonna grab our hub and slide that on. Slide on just like that. Grab our larger nut there, put that on, tighten that up. If your nut has been grooved, make sure you find that spot, put it right back where it was. I like to take a hammer then and groove that nut. Doesn't take much. Slide that on there. Now we can take our caliper, put that on. Got our 2 bolts here to put our caliper on. That'll take a 12 millimeter socket. All right, then we've got that wheel that we're gonna throw back on there. What you wanna do before dropping this four-wheeler and being finished is go ahead and check the differential oil in that rear differential. And you do that by breaking this plug open right here and just checking to make sure your fluid level is where it needs to be. You obviously want your four-wheeler level, so when we are ready to, like I said, we've got to replace this joint as well. So when we're ready to put things back together, we will drop this four-wheeler down to where it needs to be, check that bolt there, make sure that we've got differential fluid in there, or at least there's enough oil in there. Probably have to add some because typically you have some drip out right there when you're doing that job. So thanks for watching.